All right, welcome everybody. I'm sure you're all super excited to meet Whynde Kuehn. She is a real prominent figure in the business architecture community. And today we're going to talk about Whynde, which is going to be really interesting. So I'm very pleased that you agreed to meet up with me, Whynde, and welcome to Blueprints.
It is a pleasure and honor. I can't wait for this conversation with you, and thank you so much for having me.
Great. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about you. So what are you like? What does Whynde do? How did you get into the field that you're in? Let's hear a little bit about your story.
I love all of that. So maybe worth saying, when I think about myself and my true essence, I'm a science and sustainability person. That's my university degrees. I'm always very much sort of big picture, systemic thinking, really like to think deeply on things. I also care a lot about my human family and world. So that's always a backdrop of the things I do. And a coach once told me that my word is big. So I think that is also something that is maybe useful to know about me. So I dream big. I like to do big. I'm definitely a dreamer. So all of that kind of underpins who is Whynde. And how I got into this field, into business architecture, was quite an accident, actually. I took a 3-month temp job. I don't even think we called it a business architect, but that temp job turned into a career in business architecture, honestly, getting to the point of architecting organizations from top to bottom, which I really love, moving on to leading a team of 100 business architects. And at some point in there, I'm not exactly sure when, it became a life's work, right? It became a life's mission. So the way I really think about it is every day I wake up and serve a global vision and a global community for comprehensive end-to-end strategy execution enabled by business architecture.
Mm, mm, that's awesome.
Yeah,
And
that's me.
any hobbies outside of business architecture?
Yes, because
Oh, good.
that is so true. Yes. I do the outdoors and I do like to
Mm,
do big. I love to run. I'm a long distance runner. Ultra marathons, the longer the better. The longest I've ever done was a 100-mile or 160K. And I do like to climb mountains. That is also love to do. I love the idea of a journey. So those are two of my favorite things, as well as just a lot of travel. I've traveled extensively and worked for nonprofits and various areas. So to me, that's also fun. To me, that's also hobby as well.
okay. Well done. I can't say that I can match you on any of that. I'm definitely, as we mentioned earlier, the outdoors is not really my thing, but it's awesome. So any particular mountains that you explored that you have found really great?
Oh, I love that. I have spent some time in the Cascades, and maybe one of my favorite mountains is Aconcagua in Argentina. Also Cotopaxi as well. So I think those are a couple that come to mind anyway.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now let's go back to work. So, what were the key turning points for you? You mentioned that you got into this just as from a temp job and it kind of evolved from there. But at some point, there must have been, hey, oh, I could do this because it's quite different from what you might have initially thought. What was that key turning point for you?
I love that question. And it's almost hard for me to introspect on this journey. It was so fluid and evolving, and I was always just following my bliss. So I was just following my bliss. A turning point was probably co-founding the Business Architecture Guild in 2010, but it wasn't even until many years later that I think it would really sink in what that meant and what we were doing as a global community. I think stepping into a leadership role with a very large practice, I think was also probably a turning point for me, but also something that it's work related, but not. It coincided. There was a period of time where I did a lot of pro bono. I did 3 months of pro bono a year, primarily throughout Africa and Southern Africa.
Wow.
And I just Loved it, loved every minute. And so I went to my boss at the time and I said, how about I work 12 months in a 9-month period and I go take 3 months off to do these things that are important. Those experiences were so life changing to me because I saw poverty, I saw very different context. I also worked with some of the most incredible African leaders across the continent. And so a couple things make that a notable turning point for me. One is that I actually got to architect more hands on, more in the details, working for social entrepreneurs, nonprofits, versus really large organizations where things like business models and capabilities can seem really intangible. It's like direct impact, right? Directly working to scale and help these organizations. So I really got to know the architecture in a different way, and I had to become really practical with it. The second turning point was just being with these amazing people because they taught me a lot about myself and about humility and what African leadership looked like, which was very different than American leadership. So that totally shaped how I would lead my team and eventually think about leadership. And I also saw, wow, the power of the possible. People that were, I have chills as I'm saying this, they just took it upon themselves to lead their countries out of poverty or whatever, these amazing things that these social entrepreneurs did. And I just watched what they did and how they never thought to not try. So that planted in me also that anything's possible. We can do big. We're just going to decide we're going to do it if the right thing and let's make it
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
It is about making the decision. I think that's what it boils down to because so many people would look at certain things and go, I don't think I can do this. Or what I say is almost like a closed mindset of what you could explore. And I'm not saying it isn't difficult, I'm not implying, but just having the will to go, let's give this a go. There's not much we can lose from trying.
I couldn't agree with that more. And it is about making that decision and knowing that all of us, all you have to do is decide, and the right things and the right people are going to line up. And it will definitely be better than if you didn't try. Oh, I so
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Any favorite countries that you've been to that were the most impactful in your life?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. Mozambique. Mozambique. I have spent a lot of time with just a very deep love of Mozambique. South Africa, Malawi, Cuba. Feel very lucky to have spent time there as it opened not some years ago, and also Lebanon. Those are some of my favorite places on the planet.
Okay, that's awesome. Do you know how many countries you've traveled to?
I have lost count now. It is over 40 something, but I
That's
should do it.
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay. I'm sure somebody's going to want me to ask you this question. So I will ask you this question, which is not in the script, but I will ask you. What were you guys thinking when you formed the guild? What was the inspiration behind going, oh, we're going to create this body of knowledge? What were you thinking?
I love that. Even if it wasn't in the script, I do like that. Boy, I can remember those days and meeting in hotel rooms and just having those conversations. I will say we were really, from my perspective, of course, if you ask other co-founders, they may say different things, but we were really focused on trying to formalize and create some consistency around the perspectives, even what is business architecture, what is not business architecture. And I appreciate that so much today because if we do have that common understanding of what it is and its positioning, or at least just what it is, let's just say what it is. And if we have a global community that can work together to evolve that, that created an incredible foundation to actually use the discipline for value, which is what it's all about, right? It's not, the models are a means to an end. So we were at the time very focused on consistency, body of knowledge, and it would be later then, and I'm just saying this because I can say we weren't thinking this, right? It would be later that things like certification or training accreditation, vendor programs, even community, right? All those things would come later. And we did deliberately say let's focus on the discipline first in the usage, and we'll focus more on the role and the profession and things like that later, because otherwise it's like, where do you start? But that was the vision. And I don't think, I would love to hear what other co-founders think, but I don't think any of us could see where the guild is today or what the global community would do, and how this idea would grow. We just really wanted to bring some consistency.
Great. I think it's been very helpful to thousands of people. So kudos. I do think having a body of knowledge does make a difference. Because it's about language, it's about understanding each other, understanding what the purpose is. And people do interpret things differently, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's always a place to start. We can always evolve it as we need, but it gives us an anchor. Absolutely.
so a question for business architects. Um, how would you describe the importance of the role of business architecture, especially today? Because I think, and we'll probably lead into saying it's going to become more important, but what is your thoughts today around the importance of business architecture?
Yeah. And you're right. I think it will grow, but I think that the core essence of what it brings to the table is probably the same. I listen, there's a million ways you could describe it, but I like to describe, let's say, the value of business architecture in three big categories. And the first is intentional, and might I add sustainable design of organizations, right? So business architecture gives us these macro level blueprints to reflect what we do and be able to design and redesign that. Second is enabling strategy execution from end to end, strategy to execution, both with the unique role that business architecture plays that's often missing to inform strategy, to help translate it into a cohesive set of actions, and to be able to shape work around it. But secondly, to give that golden thread for the continuing alignment, right? So we have strategy tied to architecture, tied to execution. And then as the world changes, that can ripple through, and execution feeds back to strategy and all those good things that we know. And so those two things in particular, I really see go together, because as an organization executes its strategy, or as it transforms or responds to whatever it's going to respond to, that is going to shift, right? The design of the organization a little bit. And so those things together give organizations a tremendous agility. They give it the ability to change and change. And I think that is fundamental. And as we design our organizations with intent, being able to design around reusable building blocks and things like that. But the last thing is just business architecture underpins so many decisions that
Mm.
we can leverage it for within an organization. It gives us a more holistic view on whatever it is. Could be risk, compliance, could be cost, could be sustainability, investments, right? I really think about it that way. Yeah, that's the value.
I would agree with you. I think sometimes in the chaos, in this continuous data world where there's so much stuff, it has history. It also, some things are good, some things not so good. And there's multiple systems, there's shadowware, there's technical debt. It's good to have what I would call an anchor to really manage those processes. When I say processes, all the activities that are occurring in the organization, having some way in which to anchor some of the thoughts, because I can imagine for leaders it must be overwhelming having so much to deal with. Just think
Yeah.
little changes have huge impacts.
Exactly. Very well said. And you also inspire the thought. I always marvel that organizations have data for everything and everyone except the holistic view of what they do. So this actually gives them that data. We often think about business architecture as blueprints, but it's also the data, right? About what
Mhm.
we do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That
It's managing that in a more elegant way. So let me ask you this about business architecture. Do you think business architecture is also about design?
great question. So I think one could talk about architecture versus design and parse those things out using a bunch of examples and physical things. I think it is about designing, even deciding the building blocks we have. But what I will say even further is business architecture is that scaffolding that is going to help bring together a lot of the other design disciplines. So, truly doing design within an organization is very much multidisciplinary, right?
Yeah.
It is human centered design, it is business and IT architecture, it is process, it is organization design, it is all these things. And I love that you asked that too, because business architecture is not a white horse. It's not the only answer, but
Yeah.
it does need to work in close partnership with all those things too, not just design and redesign, but also then to get ideas into action and
Yeah.
change them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that design thinking approach, really understanding what that user experience is, all of those things are part of the design process. And obviously, bringing in those different aspects makes a huge difference. I think for me personally, design is about intention, right?
Mm.
And I
Yes.
think this is where architecture has has a similar intent or approach, which is intentional. We are making decisions and we capturing information and we understanding how things work intentionally, not just for the sake of capturing data or whatever it might be.
I love that so much. And that's the words I use. Intentional design. We're totally aligned. It's not just like intentional, I think is
Yeah,
exactly the spot on. And it's the differentiator, right?
yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so let's talk about the future a little bit. There's lots of exciting topics. So we've got AI, we've got business architecture itself, we've got enterprise architecture, we've got a whole bunch of different changes that are happening with user experiences around the world. What do you see happening in the next 5 to 10 years? Because it's going to
Oof.
be big.
Gonna be fun, right? And I can see we're very much aligned just by some of the examples that you shared. From my perspective, here's the way I look at it. And let me say, I think there are a few big forces or trends that are at play right now, and how they play out and gain traction will lead us to what we look like in 5, 10 years. The first trend that I see very up close and personal is strategy execution. Again, more accurately, strategy to execution gaining traction as something that matters just on its own. Business architecture as a facilitator is a key part of that, but just people saying, you know what, we really have to get good at this muscle for change and we can do better. So as that catches on, that is, or could, especially if it gets magnified, bring a lot more leaders, strategic planners, different people in this space. And hopefully driving a lot more desire for business architecture, a little bit less of the advocacy work that we do today.
Yeah,
Another trend I think is just how much the business architecture as a strategic discipline catches on, how teams around the world and practitioners around the world continue to share success stories and show the value and interest people across not just strategy execution, but many different uses of the business architecture. I also think another trend or a force is the enterprise architecture profession. And if there's more attraction to try to really make business and IT architecture, right, all of enterprise architecture more cohesive, more of a profession, if that gains energy, that could be a little bit different than the strategic planning.
yeah, yeah,
And then I also think, which as you already alluded to, organizations just driving and craving data driven insights, looking at the business architecture for that. And then the final factor maybe around AI and how we leverage it for business architecture to build the knowledge base to actually be able to use it. And also the usability of the tools in this space. Because again, back to point of other people using business architecture, if we can make it really friendly and really data driven and interesting, I think we can see a lot more uptake. One future, and honestly, it's the future that I'm hoping for and fueling, even though I think it's going to be a combination of all these things, is that business architecture does get more democratized and it is just really pulled to be leveraged for strategic planning, for strategy execution, because I think it's a lot more people involved, a lot more people using these insights, and a lot more buy-in.
Yeah. So you do a lot of, you work in communities and the social side. So do you see AI being an enabler or do you see it as a disabler? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I love it. An enabler, absolutely. And I would say, for the most part, at least the communities I've worked with, and this is business, IT, enterprise architecture, there's a desire for it. There doesn't seem to be a fear for it. Now, maybe everybody's not as curious as they should be, but I don't see anyone too much that's afraid of what it is. Um, the value is in using the business architecture so much more than the creating. Now, there is value in creating common mindset, common mental model, bringing people together, but to some extent, right? I think it is just a tremendous enabler because the less time we spend building and mapping, the more time we're using it and
Yeah,
bringing insights and value to the business. And that's just the mapping, let alone leveraging it to actually, like I say, apply business architecture in every single use case. So I think it's only good. And any of the concerns that are there with AI and the human machine balance, like that all applies here. I won't even say any of that, but I
yeah.
think it's definitely an opportunity. Yeah.
I don't see right now business going down that route. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many shadow systems, there's so much stuff we got to get through. Trying to navigate through that short of just starting again is going to take time. It's not something we can do, but we can speed up some of the tasks, absolutely. And as you said, use architecture, not try create the architecture all the time. That's where AI can really be super helpful and also promote the architectural practice just because, which should be great.
Exactly said on all points. Exactly right. Exactly right.
So, in your current role, maybe just describe one of the roles that you play, because I imagine you've got multiple hats, but in your
Yeah.
current, whichever role, whether that's with a guild or with your own business, I know you're an author, you've got books, you've got training, like there's so much, right? But choose one. Are there any opportunities or challenges that you see happening in that particular area? Which one would you like to talk about?
Just generally speaking, in one of the roles, any challenges? I think there is a challenge probably that applies across all of them, which is just continuing adoption of business architecture, right? And helping people to understand and see the value and become familiar with the fact that we are pretty comfortable at looking at physical things, buildings, products, having blueprints and specs. But when it comes to these conceptual businesses that we have, we lose that thinking, that intentional, right? Design, as you're saying. I think that's one part of the challenge. I think the second part of the challenge is just that some of this is a function of how organizations have been structured over time in all of our societies for that matter. But business architecture also makes us think enterprise, makes us think big picture, it makes us think across silos and what's best for the whole. And that is also not necessarily natural or first thinking to people. I even look at our education system, and whether it's business school or grade school, we're taught all these subjects separately just to think whole, right? Not parts. Thinking whole, I think, is also part of it. And then not being taught in business school. So that is one of my roles is teaching and also trying to get others to adopt this as well. But just still that buy-in around these ideas is, I think, one of our biggest challenges still. But
Yeah.
we're getting there. Yeah.
I think you're doing a great job. Certainly the message is I definitely feel that it's coming through. I think that having a body of knowledge, having consistency, having all of those things where people learn and understand, it does help build the practice significantly. And I know that the Guild has also made tremendous strides working with your TOGAF groups and these to really embed architecture far more, I don't know, in a more useful way, let's say. But yeah, so there's been some great work there as well with the messaging.
Yeah, and thanks for calling that out too, because as we were talking earlier, having a body of knowledge, having a starting point or something concrete and anchor, it gives you something to have conversations like the alignment with TOGAF that has happened. So yeah, TOGAF is aligned to all the core domains and to the work, and hats off of in the guild folks, but also a lot of incredible practitioners out there
Mm.
that are members of Open Group that make that happen. And I think that just there is one example of how amazing this community is and what conviction we have for just trying to make our organizations better.
I would agree with you on that. Okay, let's talk about competencies. If you were to describe the core competencies that an architect would need, and I just use the architecture loosely, but what would those core competencies be? Is it easy to learn? Does it have to be a natural ability? We spoke about big picture a little bit earlier, but what do you think that really at the heart of that role, what would those competencies be?
Mm, I love it. And it's to try to put the fingers on what is architectural thinking, what competencies make that up, right? I think is an outstanding thing to think about. And yeah, do they come natural? I do feel like some of them come naturally, or they may not be in us right now, but they're going to come out later as we have more and more experiences. And especially, yeah, I do. So I think some of them can also be trained, or may come out later, like I said. For example, I think there's a set of competencies around abstracting information, synthesizing information, seeing patterns, right? That is not something that always comes natural to everybody. Hey, isn't this similar to that? Hey, aren't you maybe doing something similar? Should we have a conversation? That's a key set of architectural competencies right there. And we can teach them, but I think those come pretty automatic, or people will grow into them. I think another set is around, you mentioned big picture thinking, yes, and systems thinking, right?
Yeah.
That big picture, right? I think that as a formal competency, I think is really important. And there's also a strategic thinking, but maybe not a set of competencies, but a set of experiences or knowledge of other teams we work with. To our conversation earlier about architecture and design, we have to know about human-centered design. We have to know about organization design. We have to know about technology. We have to know about all these things. It's not that we can learn all of these things, but I think to really be good at designing and taking strategy into execution, you need to know enough about those disciplines and the integrations. And the last is the communication in
Yeah.
every way. Can we visualize? Can you simplify the complex? That's a real test, I think, of an architect. If it's hard to get out of all the details, but if you can draw the picture and show layers and layers, I think that's an important competency. Communicating very well, written as well as verbal, and being able to influence and persuade, right? Things like having executives see and feel a view of the current state in the future and be ready to invest in the decisions around that. There's a lot of competencies there that aren't just architectural, but also communication. And to our earlier point about AI, especially, as the knowledge base hopefully becomes easier and quicker to create over time, that means we need to get even better at these things. An architect is an architect, a leader, and a change agent, not a mapper, right? It goes much, we're going to have to go much beyond the mapping to be really the partner that we want to be. Yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that point, because when we look at the let's call it the paperwork, we can definitely get tools like AI to do that. Really being able to clearly understand something. And a lot of people don't realize that simplicity is actually really hard to get right. It's not a simple thing. Doing something that makes complete sense to everybody and is simple takes a lot of work to get right. It's not a simple thing.
Spot
um,
on.
yeah. And so I do think with AI can go through all of our data and can do these amazing things. But to your point, it can help us with the knowledge base. But we certainly need to know what that knowledge base means and how we're going to communicate it and what does that mean for the decisions, for the strategy and the execution, and how does that all work? So it's really bringing in the human side even more so than trying to do all the technical stuff, which is important. Don't get me wrong, but it becomes less important when you've got a tool that can do the paperwork for you.
Yes. Love it. And just even you saying you have to know what the knowledge base means and you have to be able to do all those communications around it. You remind me that some of the best business architects I've ever seen were business leaders because they knew all that. That was their strength. They knew enough about the knowledge base to know what it means and how to use it. But yeah, it's the other stuff too. Right on.
Yes. Okay. So I think this is, just second to last question. Can you give advice to those entering the field? So somebody who's going, oh, I really want to be a business architect. I'm tired of being a BA, or I've been boots on the ground for too long, and I really want to focus on the strategy and really add value. What advice would you give to those people that are considering the role?
Oh, I love that. Very enthusiastically do it, join it, take the
Yeah,
journey. Back to your question earlier, which I always think about this are we born with this or can we develop these skills? If you're already feeling attracted to this and excited about this and called to it, you got it. That pursue this. The community is amazing across the world. Wherever you are, you have community. And worst case, you have global community. You have amazing programs to make it happen, right? To step into this. So just be patient with yourself and know that this is entirely attainable. And if it feels like there's a lot of information to learn up front, again, be patient with yourself and just follow that passion and don't second guess yourself. Don't say I can't do this. Just take that journey. You got a lot of friends that are waiting for you in a meaningful career of impact. I might also say focus on, as we were saying, focus on the value delivery and the competencies, building those skills that are going to help you to really deliver value. Lean there. You need to know the framework, you need to know the knowledge base, you need to know the methods, of course, but also find people, reach out to people or follow people that are really good at telling the story and just delivering value with business architecture. There's so many people that come to my mind as I say that. So watch those people. That's a way to be successful. And listen, when you start, there's going to be a lot of mapping and a lot of stuff to learn, but you're going to, yeah, you really got to learn how to make this sing. And the last I'm going to say is also, you just be really intentional about it. For some people, business architect might be the job of your dreams until the very end of your career. And some people come to this role very late in their careers and they say,
yeah,
this is what I've really been. Oh, I just never knew there was a name for it. But I also want to say it's also okay if you want to try out this role, be in it for a while and maybe move into leadership or move into another role or move into another discipline.
yeah,
That's fantastic, right? It gives you this structured thinking. It helps you see how organizations work. You get to do some really incredible change initiatives. So you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That.
that's great advice. Yeah, it's great advice. Just give it a go. It's really about learning. So you learn a new skill or you understand a different knowledge base, and just give it a go. And if it's not for you, then you go, I learned something.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And I met great people. Those things are going to happen. Those two
It's a
things are going to
They
happen.
will absolutely happen, yes. A lot of people ask, and this is one of those challenging questions, right? A lot of people will say, "Oh, how do I get a job?" I'm sure you get asked that quite often. And how would you respond to that question?
Great question. And I do get asked that. I'm sure you get asked that. I
Yeah.
would love to hear your answer to it. I will say at this juncture, having a CBA, Certified Business Architect certification, does help and differentiate you in this field, right? 10 years from now, that may not be the case, but right now it does really help. Even more, right? So that is one way. And as you pursue a CBA or other training, you're going to meet other people. So the other really big way is meet people.
Yeah.
Meet people, go to webinars, meet people online, conferences. The people that I've seen just utterly transform and go from one role into a business architect role, it's just because of the people they met. They started putting themselves out there. And if you're wondering, like, how do I get experience? There's lots of creative ways to do that. You could, within your own role, if you were a business analyst or whatever other strategic planning, you can start using business architecture methods in your role and just start trying them out. Introduce the thinking. You could either shift into that role within your organization, or at the very least, you have experience to take to another organization as well. Or I see people do my example of doing pro bono. You can get experience by helping people too,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Um,
another way. If you have no experience, jump in and help. Yeah.
Actually, that's a really good point. I was recently talking to Maria, and she's very big in the business analysis community. And she said, just volunteer. She said, because you will get more and more. And obviously, you got to do stuff, because if you volunteer and you sit there and you're a burden to everyone, no one's going to volunteer you for a job. But for instance, the Guild has heaps of stuff going on in their groups, and helping people and getting a name for yourself is really good. So sometimes you got to start and then see what happens. There's no guarantees in life. We all know that. Do you think there's any difference? I know some people ask this sometimes. Do you think there's any difference between being a female and a male as a business architect?
Ooh, I love that question, particularly because I'm very passionate about women in architecture, and there's a global movement around this. In business architecture, how we should, well, this was not the question you were asking, but the first thought that came to my mind is, do I feel any sort of thing out of balance? And I really don't in business architecture. Enterprise architecture, IT architecture is a different story. But I think women and men, and I hate to generalize, so I don't mean to, because just doesn't
Yeah.
apply across the board, but women are really good on some of the empathy stuff and more of the communications. Again, I really hate generalizing, but I just think we see more prevalence there. And so I do see a difference. I also see maybe a little bit more bridge building, which I think is really important in business architecture, and to succeed in the role, in the practice, being able to, how do we fit with the strategy team? How do we fit with this team? Bridge building, and just more trying to just solve that bigger problem for the greater cause. So I do feel like there are competencies or leanings that women bring to the table in a more prevalent amount that do really help in the business architect role. And I wonder if that isn't part of why we don't see many more, right? A higher percentage of women in business architecture than the other architecture disciplines.
Mm, mm, mm. I must be honest, I agree with you in most of that. I'm a bit more of a geek. I'd probably be a little bit different to the average female, but the what I do find is I don't see that the opportunity is any less for women than it is for men. And I think that is awesome. It is a field that anyone can actually, obviously with some grit and with some knowledge and determination and all those normal things that you need in any career, can look at and actively achieve. That's certainly my perspective. So I wouldn't see it as a barrier, put it that way. I don't think that is a barrier. And yes, you're right. There are different skills and approaches that both parties can bring to the table that really add value.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that point out because that's really important. I feel no barriers for women in this discipline. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's a really good thing. And like we said, it could be a bridge to other places, including women that may want to get into more technical architecture roles. This is also a bridge to that if that feels a little bit trickier, right? Yeah. And then, of
Yeah.
course, you bring all the business context too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and then we'll go into maybe you can tell us a little bit about your books and a few of the things that you're doing. But last question, if you could go back in time to a young Wendy and give yourself some advice, what would it be?
I would say, oh, I wish I could have heard this, and I wish every young woman could hear it. Maybe they don't need to. I sure did. You don't have to be perfect.
Mhm.
You don't have to know every single thing. No one does. You don't have to do it all. We're human. We're never going to get it right. And we're never going to get it done. It's about that journey. And again, just emphasizing whoever my role models or whoever colleagues I was looking at, nobody knows everything. Nobody ever will. So stop trying to. And I think maybe a separate but related is one thing I learned after mountain climbing. And I remember it was a certain mountain, it was a certain time. And I finally got the lesson that it's not about running to the top of this. It's not about just, I did this mountain. It's not about, I just did this ultra marathon. I did this thing. I finally said, for me anyway, pick the next mountain that will help me become the person I want to become, not to stand on top of that mountain. And I'm sharing physically and I'm sharing metaphorically because there's a lot of things I felt like I had to do as that young Wendy. But now, even though I work a lot and do a lot of things, I do it out of passion and mission. And I do it because I want to, or I do it because of who it allows me to become and what I want to give. It's not that I have to do anything. It comes from joy. So just to try to relieve some of that pressure on
Mhm.
younger Wendy. Yeah.
I know, and a lot of people I've spoken about talk about that imposter syndrome, feeling that, oh, what if I get caught out and I don't know everything? And yeah, and then you realize, I suppose, in the end that, as you pointed out, everyone is a bit like that. So you're not alone. It's just all good, and you can chill a little bit. It'll be fine. Yeah.
Exactly. Enjoy the learning. And especially with now the pace of technology, like no one is ever going to know everything, right? And it'll
No,
soon be
there's no way.
it's true.
So
It's
have some
true.
fun. Yeah. So you wrote a book, and I read, this was probably almost a year ago, I think, when you launched it. I'm not quite sure the exact dates, but, and you said something very pertinent. You said, the book took me, I don't know if you said it was 3 months to write, but the writing took 7 years or something like that. Sorry, I'm not quoting you
No, no, no.
correctly, but I that was the essence of what I understood. And that resonated so well because a lot of people think you can do things really quickly and it's just done. But actually, it's the whole conversation of the learning, of the experience that you've gone through. So tell me, I know you've written too. So tell me a little bit around your writing. What are you thinking when you write? What is your motivation behind it? Tell me a bit more.
Oh, I love that. Oh, thank you for asking. For strategy to reality. And at that time, I'm counting what the years would have. I probably said, how long did it take me to write it? Either 17 years, 4 years, or 2 months.
Yeah,
Because
okay,
at that time,
that's the
I had
right
been
way.
practicing, right, for 17 years. Now, this is really relevant, right, to I think takeaways. But 4 years is when I wrote the Straight Talk blog, right? So twice a month, I would unpack business architecture and then 2 months to actually sit down. And it wasn't full time, 2 months to sit down, pen to paper. I love the writing so much. It's not easy, but it is a journey that I love. And I guess the way it feels to me, I feel like I am co-creating with something bigger,
Yeah.
like strategy to reality. Part of why I could sit down and do it in 2 months was I had worked through those thoughts for 4 years before that. And so it felt like my ideas were actually just coming back through me. I remember some moments very distinctly. Again, it's not an easy process, but it felt a lot of flow just coming back. The other thing, especially with strategy to reality, I literally had people's names on my wall. I'd be thinking about in the fondest way, like, what would this person need? What would this person want to hear? When I say this, everything I do is for and because of these people. It is. That's why I wake up every day. And so that mindset of just the service, or I don't care if one person buys this, if this helped them in their career, their life, I'm done, right? I did it. But part of the journey of writing too is it is continuing to work the thoughts until you're ready to put them in a book. At least that's me. And I think that makes it possible for a lot of people to do too. Right?
So we spoke a little bit, you do lots of things, right? So writing,
Yeah.
teaching, speaking, and so forth. Do you have favorites? Do you have things that you like more than other things?
I love that. I do love writing. I love writing. And I should have mentioned Brian Cameron and I, who's the associate dean of the business school at Penn State, we wrote the execution challenge. That was a very different process, co-creating, by the way, but that one comes out soon and that one's
Oh,
strategist.
nice. Yes.
Yeah,
When you
but that
say
was very
soon, is it like soon or is it
July 11th it comes out. Yeah.
okay? Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, but I love writing so much more than I can say, and I love teaching so much more than I can say. Even I remember so long ago, moms are so smart. My mom just saying, "Wendy, you're a teacher. You always have been a teacher." And I feel like a writer and a teacher for sure. I just love being able to share and explain things and writing classes and teaching classes and watching these amazing people and watching how they interact with each other. I love the teaching. I love the community. So yeah, those are probably like some of
Yeah.
my favorite things. I won't say the other non things that aren't as much
Okay.
favorites, but anything to do with those. Yeah.
And you do travel quite a bit as well. Do you find that tiring going between Norway and America and Europe and wherever else that you go?
Yeah, no, not a bit. For this reason, teaching community, right? I get so much energy from it and these amazing people. And I love seeing different places. I'm just in love with the world and its people. I really enjoy it. So, a good example is so last year I was in Australia for a month, coast to
Okay.
coast. I forget the statistics now, but it was over 30 events. We had 3 events in some days and some were longer. The incredible Daryl Carr and a lot of incredible people made this possible. And it was just came from a place of just serving and loving to just bring people together and educate. But even this 1 month nonstop, coast to coast, people would be like, "Are you really tired?" And I'd be like, "I am bouncing off the walls. No, I can sleep later." So I get a lot of energy from it. Just love the ideas and the people.
Would you call yourself an extrovert?
Thank you for asking that. No, I'm actually I am a 51% introvert. And
Okay.
this explains some things for some people. So I am by nature an introvert, which is also why I love the writing and creating. And that is how I charge quiet, thinking, introspecting by myself. But to the point about the 48% extrovert, when I'm there, I am just immersed, right? Yeah. But I am an introvert, actually. Yeah.
They do have a term called a highly performing extroverting introvert, something like that. It's one of these like super complex terms, but it makes a lot of sense where somebody can actually thrive in an uncomfortable setting and gain some things from it. So what you
Yeah.
described reminded me of the saying, I'm not saying it correctly, but yeah, it reminded me of that.
Switch. Yeah. Yeah.
How can someone get hold of you? So you're obviously online, you're on LinkedIn. If they want
Yeah.
to access your books, how would they get in touch with you? What's the best way to communicate with you?
Yeah, really good. LinkedIn is a good way for sure. Also, I'm only pausing because things are slightly fragmented, I realize, in some places. So the book Strategy to Reality, there is a website called strategyintoreality.com. So that it's widely available around the world, but if you're not sure where to get it for your region, that there is a page there that will help. And you can
Okay,
also get in
great.
touch with me through that mail as well. And BizArc Mastery is also another good place for people to access just tons of free resources and programs. And again, there's info contact there as well. And the execution challenge, no site for that one yet, but that will be available on the usual online commerce sites as well.
Okay, perfect. We will, in the blog after this session, we will actually include some of those links for people so they shouldn't fuss too much. But thanks for sharing. And yes, I think LinkedIn is a fantastic forum to communicate professionally without all the other dramas that you get on
So
some of the other social media platforms.
true,
So
true,
that's
true.
awesome. Wendy, it's been a huge privilege. I am hoping that people will really get to know you a little bit better for who you are. But thank you so much for joining me and my team on this Blueprints for Success episode. I'm absolutely thrilled to have had you with me today. So thank
Likewise, thank you so much. Pleasure and honor. And thank you for all that you do for this community and helping people in their careers around the world. We're in it together, and I really appreciate you. So thank you again.
thank you. Thanks so much, Wendy.